If you grew up throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, when nu metal in particular was a big phenomenon in music culture, then you must have definitely heard of Limp Bizkit. I've covered them a bit in my Rise and Fall of Nu Metal video, and one of the Limp Bizkit albums that I've talked about was Results May Vary, an album that is so infamously bad that I feel like it really needed its own video. Often referred to as the worst album in an already controversial and hated band, Results May Vary is an album that has always fascinated me, not just because of the music that's on the album, but also because of what it represents in both the band's discography and even in the genre as a whole. In fact, I think what it represents in the band's discography and in the genre is more interesting than the music itself, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Limp Bizkit is not necessarily a band that I like. Quite frankly, I always thought they were bad. Even their most central album I really don't like for the most part. And I certainly wasn't alone on that, considering that when people look back on the commercial peak of nu metal, they tend to refer to Limp Bizkit as one of, if not the worst nu metal band to ever get radio play. But they were still undeniably popular regardless, and that's because the band during their prime really did encapsulate heavily the sound of the late 90s, specifically the nu metal sound. Yeah, a lot of what made nu metal, well, nu metal can be found with Limp Bizkit, and that's mostly on the aspects that people don't really tend to look back on fondly. There are aspects of other nu metal bands that you could argue have aged poorly or feel very of their time, but Limp Bizkit does very much feel like a product of its time, more than any other nu metal band that was mainstream that I can think of. I mean, they were loud, they were in your face, they were extremely vulgar, and this kind of attitude was something that resonated heavily with angsty teens at the time. Like, you listen to Limp Bizkit and you know exactly the kind of demographic their music was appealing to. Sure, a percentage of people who were fans of the band were generally hip-hop heads. I mean, the band did have its share of rap features across their songs, in like both of these albums, but really it was more so pandering to dumb middle schoolers with skateboards and ripped jeans. They never really took themselves seriously during the peak of their popularity or even prior to it. I mean, Fred Durst himself even said that about the band, and their appeal was always centered more on the anthemic aspect of the songs. It was very much ingrained with the nu metal attitude that was prominent throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, but just like a lot of other genres, it wasn't necessarily a phenomenon that lasted a particularly long time, as already by 2003 or so, the public was already getting tired of hearing nu metal. There were still some exceptions of course, but it was clear that trends and attitudes were already starting to change, especially during a post 9/11 period. And for a band like Limp Bizkit that was already getting heavily criticized during their prime by even famous musicians like Marilyn Manson and Trent Reznor, and were severely controversial in events like Woodstock 99 or the 2001 Big Day Out Festival, it was certainly going to be hard for the band to still remain relevant in 2003 when the public at the time wasn't exactly looking forward to listen to music with Fred Durst telling you to take a cookie and stick it up your ass. Times were now more fragile and people were still trying to recover from the September 11 attacks. So if some nu metal bands were still looking forward to retain that mainstream success, they probably needed to take a different direction with their music. And that's exactly what Limp Bizkit did, at the very least kind of did with Results May Vary. This album was a lot less rap focused, having a lot more songs that were generally ballads or just had more emotional lyrics, with Fred Durst singing more often than rapping. And sound-wise, it was also kind of different as well, although that was mainly because of the departure of the band's guitarist Wes Borland. I'll get more into that later on, but if you can clearly tell by the title of this video, this album was a clear failure in all fronts. Like sure, the album still managed to go platinum status, but it still sold far less than one significant other than Chocolate Starfish. And that's not even getting into the critical reception of the album. Critics were already not very positive with Limp Bizkit to begin with. I mean, that 49 on Metacritic doesn't exactly look that hot. But Results May Vary, even for the band's standards, was torn apart, not only by the critics but also by the public as well. Even people who were fans of Limp Bizkit were finding a hard time defending the album, and for a good reason. This album is abysmal. Like, I don't think there's really anything from this album that is worth defending at all. In fact, I think this is honestly one of the worst albums that I've ever heard. heard. Yeah, this one is really rough. Going back to what I've said about Wes Borland leaving the band in 2001, this was a big deal for Limp Bizkit fans, because if you heard people talk about Limp Bizkit, that is past the point of people trashing the band for being terrible and corny. Wes Borland was often referred to as the best part of the band, and to many the one redeeming factor. He was a very talented guitarist who was known for his sonic experimentation and his layering techniques. So when he left the band to focus on side projects, it was clear that it was not going to be the same without him. And it certainly wasn't, because the instrumentation of Results May Vary sucks. Not only does the album sound far more generic and dire compared to the albums that preceded it, but the songwriting is also just extremely weak and repetitive as well. Mostly focusing on these boring, droning instrumentals that just feel very limp. You see what I did there? Really, the most interesting thing about the album musically is the fact that there's at least 1 or 2 songs here that try to sound like Deftones. Badly. The most notable one being the lead single Eat You Alive, which is already a concerning song based from the title alone. I mean, fucking Christ, Fred Durst is already an obnoxious and even kind of unpleasant figure in music. I really don't want to hear him sing about wanting to eat a girl. Like, I hope that's not what the song is about. Oh, it is about that. Great. This song is honestly one of the worst songs that I probably ever heard, like genuinely. Like even among all of the songs that are on this album, I will say that this is probably either the worst or the second worst. Yeah, believe it or not, there is some very strong competition. This album really is that bad. It's not just on the concept alone of Fred Durst being creepy to a girl, but like I hate the way that he flows his lines. I think the way that he's trying to come off as this horny lunatic who can help himself is pretty fucking pathetic. I hate this really awkward bridge that doesn't even flow well with the rest of the song. And even the chorus, I think it's just generally stomach turning. Like yeah, it is kind of a powerful scream, I guess I can give it that, but considering the concept of the song, it immediately ruins it for me. I don't know, maybe I just really hate his vocals here. Like even when he has the technical skill to scream, it just sounds genuinely revolting. And it's not even a unique scream, like I said before, it sounds like it's trying to badly imitate Deftones. There's also the opening song / Kid, Re-Entry, and Underneath the Gun. Those two songs don't necessarily sound like Deftones. I mean, there's really no metal influence or any vocals that sound similar to She Knows, but they still have a clear shoegaze influence to them, which is one of the many things that Deftones music generally has. And this is something that will sound good on paper. I mean, Limp Bizkit can be making the same music over and over again. If anything, they're a band that would probably need a shift. The problem with that, however, is that Results May Vary only really ends up proving that a band without Wes Borland doesn't really have the skill or even the soul to pull it off. And I'm not just talking about the shoegaze influence in these two songs, I'm talking about the whole album in general. I mean, let's get this out of the way, Fred Durst is just an awful singer, like in all fronts. It's one thing to have bad lyrics, which frankly every song does. Like, it feels like all of these songs are filling in the most basic form of human emotion throughout the verses, and even the hooks, which have some of the most tuneless melodies out there. But even vocally, Fred is just terrible when it comes to being sentimental. It sounds like a joke, like it sounds as about as charismatic as me trying to do karaoke on ballads. What a fucking loser. Even the biggest hit from the album, which is a cover of The Who's Behind Blue Eyes, just feels very hollow and empty. Like, this cover doesn't really add anything remotely exciting to the track, nor does it improve from the original. If anything, it just feels neutered. It just has the same boring sentiment that all of the other ballads have, and I think the only reason why this song became a hit is because it's the only song from the album with any resemblance of actual good melody. But that's because the original song has that. You look back to the original song and yeah, it only has an acoustic melody and vocals from Roger, but they have life to them. Like, Roger is able to carry a sense of soul to his performance, there's subtle intricacy to the melodies, and the way that the song builds into this hard rock portion of the track is great as well. Limp Bizkit, on the other hand, has a fucking unnecessary speak and spell section. Like, I really don't get what's the point of it. It doesn't really add anything to the song lyrically, it doesn't shift the mood of the song, it doesn't represent anything, it's just gimmicky nonsense. And it doesn't help either that most of these songs are not only extremely boring, but they're so long as well. They drag so much, and it feels like you're listening to the same portion of the song for 5 minutes. Even when the album tries to have more energy to it and is more in line with the older albums when it comes to the rap rock sound, it still feels very forced. It's not just that the instrumentation feels a lot more basic, but performance-wise, Fred feels like he's more concerned on how aggressive he can scream to the listener than providing an actual fun groove or line. And that's not to say that the older Limp Bizkit albums were necessarily good at this, but at the very least, singles like Rollin' or Break Stuff had infectious flows that were actually catchy. It's very easy to find those two songs childish and even obnoxious, but they also had appeal to them. I don't think there's really anyone out there who's bumping to songs like Gimme the Mic or Head for the Barricade, the latter which sounds like a terrible Rage Against the Machine ripoff. Hey, maybe that's why they talk shit about them. Results May Vary in general just feels like a culmination of all of the worst aspects of Fred Durst, not only when it comes to singing, but when it comes to Fred taking full control of the making of the album. Yeah, that's right, if you look at the credits to Results May Vary, Fred Durst is credited for a lot of it, even when it comes to guitar. He was originally going to have Mike Smith from Snot to replace Borland for the album, but most of the recordings with him ended up getting scrapped. So only the first 3 songs and Head for the Barricade ended up having any of his contributions. The rest was either Fred Durst or other guests just filling in. Like, compared to the other Limp Bizkit albums prior to this one, where it felt more like Fred Durst was being backed up by the other members of the band, that were able to bring some talent when it comes to instrumentation and just generally the chemistry of the band. Results May Vary feels more like the pinnacle of Fred's ego as a frontman, and does nothing more than to expose his limitations when it comes to not just talent, but artistic value as well. He's incapable of being sentimental, he's incapable of writing songs, hell, he's incapable of actually having something to say. And listen, I don't think Fred Durst as a frontman is completely redeemable. He has been able to bring energy in some of the band's earlier songs, and he also seems to be very good when it comes to promoting the band, as well as hyping people up to their music. I mean, the band before their mainstream breakthrough was still able to develop a cult following in underground scenes, and a lot of that can be credited to Fred Durst himself. But it was clear that he was able to work much better with not just Wes Borland, but generally the other members of the band as well. Even Fred himself was aware of it, which you can tell by the fact that he leaked Wes Borland's personal email address online and told his fans to ask him to come back. Which is funny because apparently 75% or more of the people who mailed Borland told him to not come back to the band. Yeah, even by 2002, fans were already getting tired of dealing up with Fred Durst and his bullshit. He has been obnoxious and whiny for way too long, and this album seemed to be the final nail in the coffin. Results May Vary didn't necessarily kill the band. I mean, they're still together to this very day, and they did release an EP and 2 more albums after that, but with an underperforming album that was critically panned by most critics, and even people throwing shit at Fred Durst and booing him out of stage during the Summer Sanitarium tour. It was certainly the end of their mainstream relevance, something that even their 2005 EP reflected in a way. Wes Borland did return for that one, but the EP still had little to no promotion, and regardless was a big departure from the more commercial sound that the band built in the preceding albums. Even their 2011 album was too little too late by that point. Limp Bizkit was a product of its time, and just like the genre itself, they ultimately faded away from mainstream popularity. But hey, at least they made Break Stuff.